Hello, everyone. This week's Parsha is Vayeshev. This week, we kick off a narrative that many of us are familiar with, whether that's through Broadway's very inaccurate title of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, or the wonderful TV miniseries featuring Ben Kingsley as Potiphar and Paul Mercurio as Joseph, or the Disney-esque animated feature Joseph, Prince of Dreams, which has the voice of Ben Affleck as Joseph. This story has been told and retold many times in many different ways, and it's easy to see why. At core, it's a story about a father's favorite child, jealous brothers, palace intrigue. It has many elements that capture our imaginations, and so too the imaginations of our ancient sages. The story of Joseph is heavy with symbolism. Clearly, the boy is receiving prophetic dreams, and Jacob knows it to be true, but the brothers simply cannot accept the blatant favoritism and resort to some pretty drastic measures to get rid of the problem. This sin so offended God that many of the machinations of the Mishkan, the desert tabernacle, have a connection to this story, also that of the golden calf as well, which also could be linked to the story as well, but that's for another time. But if we take a look at some of these symbols, let's focus particularly on the ketonet pasim, the coat that Joseph received, right? So the coat has to feature pretty prominently in this story. It is, after all, one of the sources of jealousy that prompted the brothers to act as they did. The Midrash sees here, though, a foreshadowing of Joseph's misfortune. Using the acronym PASIM, right? The code is called Ketonet Pasim, that's spelled Pei, Samech, Yud, Mem. Right, we see in there, or the Midrash sees in there, right, an acronym for Pei Potiphar, Samech Socharim, which are merchants, right, Yud Yishmaelim, the Ishmaelites, and the Mem Midyanim, the Midianites. All of these different people that Joseph was traded through and sold to, eventually, of course, ending up in Egypt at the house of Potiphar. It's an interesting little play that the Midrash does there. And I think it's pretty cool. I love a good mnemonic. And I love when the Midrash sort of plays with this area. Obviously, it focuses on the coat because it's such an important part of the story. But clothing in general plays a large role in both the misfortune and the glory of our people. But for Joseph in particular, and this family in particular, clothing really does sort of seal everyone's fate, especially Joseph. It seals his fate, both good and bad. We know the bad, right? This is the coat that dad gave him. It was a source of jealousy for the brothers. But then they use it, the coat itself, to deceive their father, right? Who had deceived his own father also through a piece of clothing, through a garment, right? And so when the brothers dip the coat in the goat's blood, they're sort of unknowingly recreating Jacob's own deception to his own father by using, when Jacob used the skin of the goat to disguise himself as Esau and to secure a blessing for himself that was perhaps meant for someone else, right? And it's no accident here that a goat, is one of the animals that's used later on for a sin offering in the Mishkan. The Parsha goes on then to tell another story involving Yehuda and Tamar. It's a very interesting story, very different from where the narrative had begun. Clothing also features pretty prominently in that part of the Parsha as well, but that story is going to have to wait for another video. But back to Joseph, when he gets to Potiphar's house, right, he meets Mrs. Potiphar, and she seems to have a crush on him because the Torah goes out of its way to say that Joseph was, a good-looking guy. And so she wants, obviously to, have a part in that. And Joseph doesn't, give in to her advances, and she's so frustrated that she grabs his cloak, his garment, she grabs it, and he runs away, but a piece of it rips off. And it's that piece of garment that Mrs. Potiphar uses to frame Joseph that gets him sent to prison, and he's in prison for a long time. And then, in next week's Parsha, we learned that Joseph goes to meet Pharaoh, and in order to go and meet Pharaoh, his clothes get changed again. This time they signify his upward path, right? Whereas his other clothes, signified his downward spiral. These clothes that Joseph gets when he leaves prison to signify his upward mobility. And then even later, when Pharaoh appoints Joseph as vizier over all of Egypt, he even gets another set of clothes. He also gets a new name. But again, like I said, that's for next week's Parsha. And so we see here, and not even just here, but later on, in the Torah, we see the high priest receives a very detailed, specific, and intentional set of vestments that signify his status among the people. There's a beautiful piyut from a book called Ben Sirach. It's called Mare Kohen. It's a poem about the splendor of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest when he would emerge from the temple on Yom Kippur after saying God's name, and he would be safe. And it just talks about the beauty of his clothing and the way the sun would reflect off of the gold ornaments on his clothing, and a symbol of status for the people. So do clothes really make the man? It's a good question. The Torah seems to have an answer, and that answer very well might be maybe. So wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving weekend, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. So take care, everybody. And again, Shabbat Shalom.